Hello, in this video I want to examine some claims going around, and it tends to be, so it's not going to be strictly, well, essentially it will be a bit of a debunking video, but it's about examining some claims that persist, and unfortunately these get repeated and become fact, so to speak, in the community, let's say. But so this is a PDF. Now I'll put a whole bunch of links in the description, but this is Pyramids and Temples of Giza by Matthew Flinders Petrie, essentially the father of modern Egyptology. Now, if we go to page 77, and the point of this is that there are some very curious things in regarding to what's often described as lost high technology. Now, as we'll show, I think some of the main claims is really quite poorly researched, and in some cases outright lies. But firstly, now there are some very curious things. So if we begin with Egypt and the famous core hole. So in page 77, Matthew Flinders Petrie, and this is sort of one of the origins. Firstly, he discusses core hole drilling and the bowls and jars which are found in there, and they are very, very, very interesting. And there are still many questions in regards to how these were particularly done. But however, what keeps getting repeated is this lost high technology, and I agree with the term in general. However, the meaning of it, which is repeated, is that they had, almost alien-esque machinery. Now, people don't automatically go down this alien road. I shouldn't connect it to that, but that tends to be the underlying theme, that there was some sort of super technology. Now, it's mentioned in Matthew Flinders Petrie. Now, some examples of these jars, and they're wonderful, they're amazing, they're outstanding. So, for instance, so it's not just the jar on the outside, it's that the inside has been carved out as well. And I wish I had a better cross section, but what I mean is almost like, a clay pot that's turned on the wheel. On the inside it's smoothed, and these jars have it as well. And it's not just a couple, there's a large amount of them. And so these are very, very interesting questions, and we'll examine, and not all of these questions have been resolved, but the tendency has been to project, again, what's generally referred to as lost high technology. And as we will see, it's many of these claims are just incorrect factually, and a quick Google search would illustrate that point. And so people who want to portray this, and for instance Brian Foster, who pushes this forward and calls himself a researcher, but well, he's not. He's just not. And another one famous place is Baalbek. So for instance, the pregnant mother stone, and one of still gets repeated that this is the largest stone ever moved. Well, it's not the largest stone ever moved. It was never moved. It is still attached to the earth, and we'll have a look at that as we go along. But firstly, okay, so I'll put some links in there. So there are, all different opinions, and this, firstly, for the drilling. Now, as we'll examine later, talking about hardness and that certain materials cannot carve other materials. Again, this is just quite false. But there are more than just there are questions. So I'll put the links, and you can read through this yourself, because there are quite, unanswered questions. But what gets passed along is, again, next to zero research or some very, very poor research. And so there are questions. Now, that's in no doubt, and there are many interesting ones. But some points, so for instance, the drill holes, there are some questions in regards to the marking on there, and which is described as this high-speed drill. Now, there are some, again, that's a interesting point, and it's worth looking into, and I'll put those links in there. But let's begin with Baalbek. So at the Temple of Jupiter, here are some of the very large stones, and what they do is actually correspond basically to the rough dimensions. So you see the figure there, and for instance, the pregnant mother at and there are a few other stones there at the Baalbek temple. Now, and so okay, by that I mean, so what we see is we have these pieces of stone here, which and these larger pieces here. Now, these stones here were attached to the earth, and so let's go a little bit further. Okay, so there's again the stone. Now, when it's partially buried like that, it looks as if it's been dragged. Now, you'll notice also that all these stones have been cut at a very specific angle, which is very important as well. And what's, textbooks debunked. Now, come on, now here we see the stone. See how the stone is still connected to the earth and at this angle. That's the same in the other stones there in the quarry. So this stone was never moved. To say that it's the largest stone ever moved is just factually incorrect. Another thing is said that because it's 1,200 tons, that this is the that this is that modern cranes cannot lift this weight. Now, modern cranes is irrelevant to this argument, but just to extinguish this, this furphy that continues in regards to there, and also some of like the drill holes there. We'll have a look at that as well. Now, firstly, this crane is a mobile crane, and it can lift those stones at Baalbek. So number one, modern cranes can lift those stones. They can lift it quite easily, and the largest gantry cranes have a capacity of over 22,000 tons, such as Taisun in Korea. Now, essentially that could lift, all of the stones, the unmoved, unfinished, uncut stones at Baalbek. It could move all of them together. So that's furphy number one, that modern equipment cannot lift them. Absolutely false. Positive, it should be dropped. Now, another point in regards to the Baalbek stones. Now, so how did they move them? Did they move them with rollers? Well, one that continues to be said is that no wood can support the weight of the Baalbek stones. Again, absolutely incorrect. The cedars of Lebanon, famous throughout history for their many properties, but you can see here the crushing strength. So what we have, and the trunk anywhere from 1.5 to 2.1 meters. So one trunk of one Lebanese red cedar could actually support the weight of the stone of the pregnant woman if it was removed and it was moved and needed to be supported. So that's number one. That could be supported by one trunk of one tree, could support that weight, absolutely. Rollers, therefore, distributing the weight across could absolutely support the weight, and so rollers could have been moved. Now, we don't know, but the claim is that wood cannot support it, that wood would be crushed. Again, absolutely false. Now, we need to look at, and another thing that gets reported by Brian Foster, for instance, is that the cutting technology, for instance, was not available. Again, this is quite false, very erroneous. Now, again, I'll put these links into the site. So older tools like the plug and the feather can cut these stones, no problem. And we'll have a look at some examples of that, because again, a simple Google search will bring up most of this information. Now, in regards to drilling, so a star drill, which was a pole, like an iron pole with a star shape at the bottom, one person would hold it, then it would be hammered on top. You would spin the 1/4 turn of the drill, it would be hammered again. And mason teams before electronics, for instance, there we see an example of star drilling. One team could drill 40 feet per day. So that's one team, 40 feet per day. So some of these drilling claims are again quite false. And again, Google search would split. Now, here's again simple Google search. Now, another technique to split stones was to use wooden wedges. But firstly, and we'll get to now. But they didn't have steel back in days. We'll deal with that in a moment, because they did have the materials needed. But one technique for splitting stone was to use wood, and you would carve little gaps like this. You would insert a piece of wood, you would moisten the wood, and it would split the stone. A piece of wood can split stone, just the same way that you've seen tree roots grow into stones and crack them open. So again, this claim is quite erroneous. Now, as we move on, okay, now I'll put this in the link. Now, this is an excellent document, and it shows evidence of ancient techniques which are being passed on now. And so societies before drilling, modern cutting, were displaying this. So, but even after we developed that technology, there were many cultures, many places who still relied on old work. Now here's an example of a proper chisel, a toothed chisel. Now they can cut stone quite well, and again, one man can do an amazing amount of work in one day. For instance, quarry sites in countries maybe like poorer parts of India where they're not using mechanical tools, but they're still where it's manpower. The amount of stone, the quality of the stone that they cut is absolutely amazing. And again, these claims of supposed research again are poorly researched, very very poorly researched, and it's essentially bunk. Now we see some examples. Now you can look up. Okay, so some look, these drill holes, such as these. Now, again, that it's this modern, ancient, like a high technology. Well, no, this is still achieved to this day by manpower and manpower alone. And we'll deal with the steel versus copper in a moment. And so, Outisde the Iceman, famous, over 4,500 years old, found in the Alps. Now his stone copper axe is over 99% pure copper, and analysis of the impurities have shown that of the impurities, by far the highest impurity is arsenic, and that is huge importance in regards to this, because arsenical copper or bronze, but also antimony or bismuth. Now, so for instance, the Egyptian, Outisde the Iceman, his copper, which come from Tuscany, had the impurity by far the highest amount was arsenic. Now, arsenic added to copper makes it much harder. So a lot of these arguments in regards to soft copper tools is based on copper piping that you get from your hardware, which is very soft. Again, a small amount of research will bring you to arsenical copper and the importance of it. And for instance, the copper used by ancient Egypt, mined in the Sinai, naturally has a high amount of copper in it, and a high amount of arsenic in it. So the so-called soft copper chisels and tools of ancient Egypt again is misleading at the very least, because arsenical copper, arsenical bronze is quite strong. Now there's no shortage, and so that's cutting limestone. Now whether you're cutting granite or these harder metals, for instance, now we'll play, here's one example of cutting cutting granite. One man cutting granite, and he's doing it in a very short time, and he's doing excellent cuts. That's not the one. And again, there are so many examples of people who this is not an ancient technique. It was never lost. It's been used throughout time, and there are lots and lots of examples of splitting stone. And we're just wait till this loads up. But okay, well, I'll put the links in the description, but you can find now here, for instance, if you see this thumbnail using plug and feather and other very basic techniques, it's possible to split granite and some of these very hard stones in amazing ways. And this is another example. Again, I'll put these links in the description. And so this idea that you cannot split that using copper tools, you can do it with wood, for God's sake, but you can also do it with arsenical copper, which is very much different from the soft copper wire that you have in electric cables or use in piping. And again, this is just some pretty basic a bit of googling. Now, in regards to that the Romans didn't have this technology, well, the Roman world, across North Africa, the Middle East and Europe, they built hundreds of temples, and they did this very ornate carving on, especially for instance, these Corinthian columns. Now that's again with Foster claims in regards to certain things. Now, okay, now let's bring. Okay, I'm going to pause and continue on. Okay, so let's continue, and now, for instance, let's look at one of the other claims is that the stones from the quarry at Baalbek were uphill. Now, I'm using Google Earth here to measure this. Now, there has been some other survey. Now, I couldn't get the exact data of it, so I'm going to stick with Google Earth for the moment. And to begin with, so the claim is that the stones were taken uphill, and therefore it's a really very, very hard thing to do. Now, technically speaking, if we use the Google, so what we've done is we create a track, and then we can use the elevation. And so beginning here at the quarry, we begin at an elevation of 1,130 meters. Now, Google Earth is not 100% in regards to this, but I'm going to use this data because then, just to be generous, because there has been some other published data in regards to this, and that the quarry is actually slightly elevated, and that even using Google Earth depends on what part of the quarry you're working from. But I'm working from where the pregnant woman stone is, and the pregnant woman was never moved. It was never completed to be carving, so that's also a generous to them. But so what you'll see is here, this elevation track, it's slightly exaggerated because the height in regards to the length is, again, it's slightly exaggerated. So the angle there looks like it's quite steep. But however, if we go to simply, you get the data, put into your right triangle calculator, and what we get is that the ramp that would have, from the pregnant mother to the final quarry site, would be well, it's less than 1 degree. And so, for example, so if the horizontal distance is 1,112 meters, then the length of the ramp slope would be 1,112.1 meters. So there is a slight mechanical disadvantage, but it's so slight as to be effectively zero, negligible. No, I shouldn't say zero. It's 0.01. So mechanical advantage, again, you can it's the basics of of the world. It's been proven. It's basic Newtonian physics, really. So again, that's what the actual angle would look like. And even this illustration here is slightly exaggerated. You would really do a straight line with a straight line on top, and you'd hardly be able to tell the difference between the two. It's less than 1 degree. So technically speaking, it is uphill using Google Earth. However, that might necessarily be the case. But even being generous and saying that it is, that slope angle is so slight as to be effectively zero. Now, another claim is that because this foundation was before the Roman era, the mother of Constantine, Helena, come to the site and marveled at the foundations there of the temple. However, her grandson brought the Lateran obelisk to Rome, and so this was of an Egyptian obelisk of red granite. So, again, Aswan is over 500 miles away. Again, that's a pretty impressive move. But the Romans loaded this obelisk onto a ship and then transported it to Rome, which is many, many times the distance from Aswan to the Heliopolis and these sorts of places where these obelisks are. So again, the Romans were able to do amazing work. They did it on such a grand scale, and that, again, sort of the claims made by Foster in his videos is that the Romans didn't have this technology, and it's a lost high technology. Absolute bunk. That's now, unlike the questions in regards to some of the drill holes and the jars in Egypt, these claims are thoroughly incorrect. And anyone who's anyone who wants to push this forward and sell books on that really should do some research. You write a book, but this is clearly not the case. Now, the Lateran obelisk transported by Constantine was over 400 tons. Red granite, you measure the size of it, you can get a very good estimate of the weight. You don't need to put it on a scale. The density of the stone. So 400 tons is nothing to sniff at. And if we go to, so back in Baalbek, the largest of the stones moved there is 800 tons. That's at the base of the temple of Jupiter. And for instance, so for instance, we have this one stone. The largest there is 800 tons, which is twice the weight of the ladder and obelisk, but there's the scale doesn't change. It's effectively the same. Now the materials such as the famed Lebanese red cedar, known techniques such as the block and tackle, which are there's illustrations, not just carvings of Roman lifting technology, which is simple. A block and tackle is as simple a technology as you can get, but you have a massive mechanical advantage emerges from it. And but more importantly, so we have on at the base of the Temple of Jupiter, I showed earlier those larger stones with the drill holes there. My Firefox is freezing up, but they correspond to the size of the tomb of the stone of the pregnant woman, which was and it's a safe assumption to say that this block was then split. So there we see the pregnant woman, and so this larger stone, quite possibly, now that's, so for instance there we see these large stones which correspond, but then they were split into smaller groups, and as I showed earlier in those videos, stone splitting technology using wood wedges or plug and feather, it's again a relatively easy operation to do. And so you cut the large stone and then you split it into blocks, and that way these stones have the same shape and same size and can be fitted back together in the temple site. So now also, so the ladder and obelisk was not only moved from Egypt, it was then set back into position. It collapsed after an earthquake, and then Pope Sixtus V put it back up. Now a piece was broken from the bottom, so it's not as large as what it used to be. Now another example of the Roman era doing these types of operations is Pompey's column. Now this is red Aswan in red granite from Aswan, over 285 tons, and it was transported to Alexandria during that Roman period. Greeks and Romans were excellent engineers and craftsmen, along with other and strictly speaking, ancient Rome and Greece is not strictly, it's more of a classical period. There's different versions of, but what we have is essentially unbroken technology from the Roman times being able to achieve some amazing things. Now, another claim is, for instance, in regards to the pyramid, because the pyramid is a masterpiece of engineering, and that how level it was, and that very often repeated claim that the this level of survey technology and carving and construction, was a lost high technology that was only recently we only recently come back to it. Again, that's quite false. Now, there was a excellent series, Time Scanners it was called, where he travelled across many ancient sites, and by that I mean very ancient, through the Roman era up until the great cathedrals. And using the latest survey technology, he found that, for instance, many sites, again including up to the great cathedral. So once again, this claim that it was somehow lost technology is, again, it's false. It's actually been carried on through time. And so again, this is, if you look up Time Scanners, depending on your region, but Steve Burrows and these other people went around, surveyed also, like from Machu Picchu, the Colosseum, Jerusalem, Petra, St. Paul's Cathedral, and others. So once more, this claim is a false one, and a very small amount of research would show that. Now, back to the Roman, that the Romans weren't equivalent to that. They built these aqueducts which were hundreds of miles long, and now that picture there, for instance, is very, very exaggerated of the angle of it, because the angle was a consistent angle, a very slight angle to carry the water from the mountains and reservoirs to the cities. And so again, you see how the steep angle of it, but when you actually look at the aqueducts, you'll see that they're straight. Now, so not only did they were able to survey these very slight angles and maintain that for massive distances, for absolutely huge distances, and to say that this is like not comparable, well, again, that's just false. Another claim in regards to carving is that they use Mohs hardness scale, and they say, well, you can't with copper tools you can't carve and a certain other stone because it's the tool is softer. Again, that's just really poor research, and so Mohs hardness scale, we see the claim, again, quite false, because a classic example is if you've ever seen a diamond ring. Diamond is at the top of Mohs hardness scale. It's cut with steel tools. Again, it can, arsenical copper can achieve this same thing again, and it's about the technique. And so soft materials can cut harder materials, and that again is a few clicks away. It's just again quite false. Now, in regards to the amazing sculpture and carving, not only for instance, in ancient Egypt, well, people are still carving granite, for instance, and these other very hard stones now using tools, doing beautiful work. This is craft. It's a trade. Again, so many people are talking about stone, Mohs hardness scale, the angles, and that this can't be lifted, this can't be lifted. These are all not only false, but it's cringeworthy in the complete lack of research. Again, a absolute lack of research. You can do this, and again, arsenical copper or arsenical bronze with bismuth and antimony can achieve the same things. And it's quite sad, like really, because we see these beautiful granite carvings still being achieved now. This has got to do with craftsmanship, people who know their trade, people who know what they're talking about, and unfortunately people who, in some cases it's outright lies. In other times it's just a complete lack of research. The problem with both the establishment and the alternative is that so many exist in an echo chamber and simply repeat things because it's been carried on, and refuse evidence that's presented to them because it goes against what they want to believe. And what you want to, you can believe anything you want, but if you present it as fact, you're fooling yourself and you're fooling other people. And there's a word for that. There are several words for intentionally fooling other people by not including very important data in there. And so pretty much that's it. I'm going to put a whole bunch of links in the description. I'm going to overload with links in the description. But again, the echo chamber in regards to some of these things is really quite fantastic. Now, there are some very important questions, and if we go back to the beginning, another interest, I began with the Matthew Flinders Petrie. Now, if you look into Matthew Flinders Petrie, his dating of the Old Kingdom differs, and it's an interesting read because you see how throughout the development have all different dates, and now some would put the pyramid at anywhere between 1000 to 1500 BC. That was pretty much demolished, and then it was pushed back to 2500 BC, where it sits as the effective the establishment view in there. But if you're really interested, you want to do a read, have a look up Matthew Flinders Petrie dating of the Old Kingdom, and he pushes it back to roughly, depends on, well, there are some good arguments in regards to that. By no means is it locked into 2500 BC, for instance, for the Great Pyramids and the Giza Pyramids. That has become the repeated over and over again. But there are some really good points. Matthew Flinders Petrie's early work on that, puts it back, and it could, it can be pushed back quite over a 1,000 years before, so 3,500 BC or even older, possibly older than that. The thing is, we don't really know. The techniques used to date these things are a little bit iffy, and so that, again, that's something that needs to be questioned and looked in at. But in regards to a lot of these claims in regards to the Baalbek stones, the aspects of the Great Pyramid, as you've seen here, are quite false and need to be examined. So with that, I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. Also, at the top of the links will be my new VidMe page, and cheerio. Have a good one.